What is the most striking difference between Westeros and the world we live in and its history? We should take a moment to consider this question instead of jumping to the simple answers, because there certainly are some simple answers that come to mind, like dragons, magic, or messed up seasons. However, we want to give a different yet somewhat related answer, if you'll indulge me. Let me lead you to our answer using an example. Take Aegon the Conqueror and Charlemagne, arguably the defining figures of Westerosi history and continental European medieval history respectively. Both are great conquerors, and both are the founders of a new realm, each in his way. While Aegon the Conqueror conquered what used to be more or less 7 kingdoms and turned it into a new entity called the Seven Kingdoms, Charlemagne conquered what is now northwestern Germany, southeastern Germany, Austria, half of Italy, and smaller parts of Slovenia, Croatia, the Czech Republic, France, and Spain, while also controlling even more territory indirectly. While Aegon became king of a new unified realm, Charlemagne was not only king of the Franks, but also became Roman Emperor in the West, a title that had been vacant for over 200 years. Okay, let's fast forward 300 years. Let's first look at Westeros over those 300 years. What happens? Targaryen king follows Targaryen king in the male line, there's one queen, and at some point there's Robert Baratheon. With House Baratheon probably being no more than a short intermezzo. The territory stays the same, the system stays the same, the dynasty stays the same. Well, the dragons disappear. That's something. Now let's see what happens to Charlemagne's empire over the course of 300 years. Roughly 30 years after his death, his empire is divided into 3 parts. What would become Germany, what would become France, and a big territory in between, the Lotharii Regnum, later to be known as Lothringen, consisting of Frisia, the Netherlands, parts of the Rhineland, parts of France, and northern Italy. This big territory in the middle was later cut into 3 smaller pieces. Parts of those were later divided among East Francia and West Francia, while the rest became the new Kingdom of Italy. And that was only the first 70 years after Charlemagne's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor. 5 years later, Charles the Bald of West Francia became King of Italy too. He was also the emperor now, but then again, still in the 9th century, Charles the Fat of East Francia became King of Italy and West Francia too. After his death, there were 3 kingdoms again. By 890, East Francia was ruled by Arnulf of Carinthia, a bastard of Charlemagne's line, West Francia by Odo of France, who was not related to that line, and Italy was ruled by Guy of Spoleto, no Carolingian either. Let's focus on East Francia from here, just to keep it simple. From 911 to 918, a Khanredin king sat the throne, followed by the Ottonian dynasty until 1024, when the Salian dynasty took over. What had been different tribes under Charlemagne, some still praying to Odin, Thor and their like, had by then turned into a highly fragmented system of duchies, graviates, principalities and so on. None of the original dynasties of those tribes were still in power or even existed. So let's summarize what we learned real quick. In Westeros, there has been one dynasty and a group of great houses that have stayed the same for 300 years. There has been virtually no territorial change at all. Charlemagne's empire, however, has changed in terms of dynasties and territory. So much so that change is the only real constant. Francia has become Germany, France, and Italy. By 1100, the House of Charlemagne is merely an idealized memory. Not even that can be said for most of the nobility of his time. Different houses have taken their places. In other words, if Aegon the Conqueror were to travel to the year 300, he would basically find the same realm he had established. Charlemagne, however, would barely recognize his empire in the year 1100. The big difference between our own world and the world of A Song of Ice and Fire is change, or lack thereof respectively. The history of our own world is a story of constant change. while the history of Westeros, and by extension of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, is a story of continuity. Now that we have this straight, it is very easy to find more evidence. Let's look further into the past, for example. 1,000 years before Charlemagne, the Franks didn't even exist as a tribe. Neither did the Carolingians or even their famous predecessors, the Merovingians. The Germanic tribes that would at some point become the Franks were still pagans, living a hard life in the woods. In Westeros, however, all of the 7, or rather 9 kingdoms already existed. 3 of them were already ruled by the houses that still rule them at the beginning of our story. House Stark, House Arryn, and House Lannister. In Dorne, House Martell was either already in power, or at least had one of the most powerful of several kings in Dorne. In the Stormlands there was House Durrandon, which House Baratheon is descended from through the female line, just as House Tyrell is from House Gardener. Only House Greyjoy and House Tully can't claim descendants from House Hoare, and whoever was king of the rivers and the hills then. We could look back even further and say that between the Andal invasion and the Targaryen invasion, few things of note happen at all, if we look at the bigger picture. Once the Andals have brought iron and the faith of the 7, there is little development whatsoever, and that period spans 1,700 years according to the shortest conceivable timeline. Even the European Middle Ages, which are considered a period of prolonged relative stagnancy, only last roughly 1,000 years and still see much more change overall. What we don't know is the reason for this stagnancy, or stability if we want to put it rather positively. There are several reasons we could come up with, of course. For one thing, Westeros is more rural than medieval Europe. Less urban population means less innovation, which, in turn, can partly account for a lack of change. We also have a good idea why Westeros is so rural. Its messed up seasons and the resulting problematic food situation. The presence of magic and dragons at some point might also have reduced incentives for innovation. But none of that really explains any of the political and territorial stability we see. Maybe you guys have an idea. If you do, put it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, like, share, comment, and visit the shit out of our blog.